I think this is one of the nicest courses I've ever played in America. I think the layout is very good. It's obviously been laid out by great professionals. I think the course is fair, it's not tricked up in any way, and it's in very good condition.
Of course, there's about 20 million golfers playing in the United States, and they select only 10 to represent the United States, and I am very fortunate and very happy that I was able to make the team.
This is my first time in the United States of America, and I must say so far I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Weather's fine, we've got a wonderful course here at Champions. Everyone's been very nice, and hope we can do the British team justice.
It is an advantage to play the little ball because it goes further, and on a big course like this, the further you can get it out there, the better.
It's a very long course, and I would say the positioning of the drives is most important. I think if you can't get up in two, probably positioning the second shot too.
Well, in match play, you kind of watch what your opponents are doing rather than playing the golf course like you would in medal play.
The grass is a little different, a little coarser than we have at home. Putting, I'm finding at the moment, is a little difficult.
Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling to be on the Ryder Cup team and play in America. It really is.
Well, it's certainly a privilege to be selected on the team, and something that all of us on the U.S. Tour worked very hard for through the year. I think Johnny Pott described it best of all when he said he's found something that is more important to play for than money.
The United States versus Great Britain in the 17th Biennial Ryder Cup matches at the Champions Golf Club, Houston, Texas. Conceived in an effort to stimulate interest in golf internationally, official Ryder Cup history began in June 1927 at Worcester, Massachusetts. The British and American teams were to be made up of native-born professionals. Representing the United States were Al Watrous, Wild Bill Melhorn, Leo Deagle, Johnny Golden, Walter Hagen, Al Espinoza, Gene Sarazen, Johnny Farrell, and Joe Ternisa. In an unofficial match between the two countries the previous year, the British were victors 13 matches to 1. This 1927 United States team redeemed that loss, defeating the British in 9 matches out of 12. In 1929, the British won back the cup English seed merchant Samuel Ryder had donated, but from then on, the United States began to gradually dominate the series. Golf was catching on in America and producing a steady stream of outstanding players. The Americans won in 1931, lost in 33, then won in 1935 and 37. The matches were suspended during World War II, but upon their resumption in 1947, the United States proceeded to win 9 out of 10, or a total of 13 of the 16 Cup matches played through 1965. And now, in October 1967, the British pros came to one of the most fertile seed beds of American golfers, the state of Texas, where men like Hogan, Nelson, Demerit, Mangrum, Burke, Bolt, and Gouldall, to name a few, learned their pars, birdies, and eagles. No native-born Texan was a playing member of this 1967 team, but the non-playing captain was. It was the Hawk himself, perhaps one of the greatest shot makers in golf history, and by nature a forceful leader, Ben Hogan. The youngest member of the 67 team, Al Geiberger, put it best in talking about the famed Bantam Ben.
He's a pretty strict coach. He rules with an iron hand. His words are few but firm.
Of course, with the talent Hogan had on call, he needed few words. His lineup consisted of the Pennsylvania strong boy Arnold Palmer, an all-time great. Another hotbed of golfing talent, California, gave him the man who caught Palmer, then beat him in a playoff to win a second U.S. Open crown, Billy Casper. There was tall, quiet, smooth-swinging Al Geiberger, and the man with a picture swing, Gene Littler. There was the then current Masters champion, Gay Brewer, a native of Ohio. The game's outstanding clothes horse, Doug Sanders, who learned his golf on the red clay of Georgia. A Connecticut Yankee, the nonchalant Julius Boros, who's always at his best when it means the most. There was Bobby Nichols, who went to college at Texas A&M and once won the USPGA title. The lean Floridian who once worked for and took instruction from Ben Hogan and learned his lessons well, Gardner Dickinson. And finally, the long-hitting star from Mississippi, Johnny Pott. The British team, too, was led by an inspiring little man, Welshman Di Rees, who was a non-playing captain here, but who had played in every Ryder Cup match from 1937 through 1961, and who captained the last British team to win the trophy, which was in 1957. A fiery competitor during his playing days, he brought an air of determination to Texas and instilled it in his players. This was indicated in some remarks by one of Di's 10-man team, fellow Welshman Dave Thomas, who was asked before the matches began if his team had a chance of winning.
I do, yes. A great chance of winning.
I think that the tail of our team for the first time is strong, and providing that we get the run of the ball, as you've always got to in anything, then I think we have a great chance of winning.
Dave's teammates, who also shared this quiet, reserved confidence, were the handsome Englishman playing in his 7th Ryder Cup match, Peter Allis, the veteran Neil Coles, a tough match play golfer, making his 4th appearance for Britain, Brian Huggett, another stern competitor from Wales, one of the most consistent money winners on the British tour, Bernard Hunt, the senior member of the team from Dublin, Ireland, the popular and always tough Christy O'Connor, a young man who hails from near the traditional home of golf, St. Andrews, Scotland, George Will, and 3 youngsters making their first appearance in Ryder Cup play. Hugh Boyle from Ireland, 24-year-old Malcolm Gregson, who was coming off 2 big wins on the British circuit, and possibly the most impressive of the young Britons, Tony Jacklin, who had recently attended the USPGA school in Florida and had qualified to play the U.S. circuit.
To the citizens of Houston, Texas, and to the members of both teams, to our citizens of the United States and Great Britain, we're delighted to come to Houston for these matches. We wish Captain Ben Hogan, Captain Di Reese, and their teams great success and great golf.
And thus, with those words from the President of the United States PGA, Max Elbin, festivities began the morning of Friday, October 20th. The University of Houston Marching Band had played their way down the first fairway and into position at the first tee for the flag-raising ceremonies. Play was over the Cypress Creek course, oldest of the 2 superb 18-hole layouts at the Champions Golf Club. Designed under the guidance and supervision of co-owners Jimmy DeMeritt and Jack Burke Jr., great golfers in their own right and most appropriate hosts, almost every hole on this 7,166-yard par 71 course is lined with a veritable forest of trees. While the naturally level terrain was left generally intact, the well-watered and magnificently conditioned fairways give up no excess roll. It's a well-bunkered course and a favorite among the U.S. pros. It's a strong, very fair, and honest test of every part of a man's golf game. The greens are very big, hold well, and thus are ideally suited to the American target golf style of play. This was borne out over the 3 days of the matches. U.S. pros play most of their golf on well-watered greens. As a result, they've developed an aggressive technique in which they carry their shots over guarding bunkers and other potential trouble directly to the pin, knowing that they can stop the ball quickly on the putting surfaces from almost any distance. But at the Champions course, the British had an elemental problem in this regard. At home, they generally play on courses that have much firmer ground. This is particularly true of the greens. Their approach to the greens is a more cautious one. They play the ball to land short so as to allow for a substantial roll up to the pin. At the Champions, however, if you land short, you stay there. Also, the average British green is quite a bit smaller than the sometimes mammoth American putting surfaces. So the British, having trouble adapting their approach shots to the Champions, also were faced with many putts of lengths they rarely would get at home. For the most part, the construction and condition of the Champions golf course, as much as they liked it, engendered a style of play for which they were largely unaccustomed. On Friday morning, Leo Fraser, Secretary of the PGA of America, called the players to the first tee for the Scotch foursomes, a relatively new innovation in Ryder Cup play, whereby the partners on a team twosome play alternate shots. Brian Huggett opened the proceedings, driving off the first tee and into the fairway. His partner, George Will, played the second shot, and the team made a par 4. Their opponents were Billy Casper and Julius Boros. Billy led off for the Americans and drove into the fairway, but he and Julius bogeyed the hole, and for a brief moment, the British led in the '67 Ryder Cup. Huggett and Will also won the second hole, lost the fourth and sixth. Then at the eighth, a 180-yard par 3, George Will had the honor off the tee. He hit a fine shot, close to the cup. Huggett made the putt, and the Britishers again went one up. But Boris and Casper managed to get even and got a tie in the morning round. Then with the afternoon match all even going to the 14th, Billy had a tough approach from behind some trees after Boris had driven too far right. But Billy did a great job with his shot, threading a needle through the pines, and he and Boris went one up. That's the way the match ended. The U.S. had 1.5 points, the British 1/2 of a point. The second foursome had a match between Christy O'Connor and Peter Allis against Gardner Dickinson and Arnold Palmer. Gardner and Arnie combined their various talents, working closely together to beat the British team 2-1 in the morning round. In this case, Arnie gave Gardner help on his reading lesson. Gardner added his good touch. And a lonesome Texan in the gallery expressed his approval of a job well done. In the afternoon, Di Rees switched his lineup and sent Malcolm Gregson and Hugh Boyle out against the formidable team of Palmer and Dickinson. Wherever Palmer goes, there's bound to be some excitement, and Arnie came through at the par 3 12th. He didn't quite get all of his iron tee shot on this beautiful hole, and the ball came up short, in the bank of the hazard at the front of the green. PGA official Lou Strong took a look and motioned to Arnie that the ball was unplayable and that another shot should be played from the tee. But Arnie had some ideas of his own. He took a look at the situation and got official approval that the ball was clear of the hazard and was plugged in the bank, which allowed him, his team, a free drop. Dickinson, who had to play the next shot, took the drop. Drops, that is, but the ball would not stay on the course. Finally, after the regulation 3 drops, he was allowed to place the ball by hand. Gardner then chipped close. Arnie sank the putt, and they have the hole. 2 holes later, they had their match in the bag, 5-4. In the third match of the first day's morning round, young Tony Jacklin and Big Dave Thomas faced off against the American team of Doug Sanders and Gay Brewer. And this David and Goliath team of Britishers, Jacklin 5'5", Thomas 6'2", got the first big victory for their side, winning 4-3. In the afternoon, Captain Hogan pitted Gene Littler and Al Geiberger against Jacklin and Thomas. But it did little good. The Britons, playing well together, did it again to the Americans, winning by 3-2 and gaining a full 2 points for the British. But in the last foursome, the U.S. team of Bobby Nichols and Johnny Pott put the heat on their opponents, Bernard Hunt and Neil Coles. Pott's tee shot to the par 3 12th put his team in position for a par. Bernard Hunt tried to match it, of course. But his shot was an indication of the predicament of his twosome against the Americans. Trapped. Nichols and Pott won 6-5. In the afternoon round, Hunt and Coles were replaced by Peter Allis and Christy O'Connor to take on Nichols and Pott. After 6 holes, Allis and O'Connor held a 1-up lead. But by the time they reached the 16th, the Americans had taken a 2-up advantage. Here, Pott had a pitch over a mound. And knocked the ball close to the hole. Nichols made this putt, one of many, and the U.S. team eventually won 2-1. At the close of the first day of play, the United States led the British 5 1/2 points to 2.5. In an interesting sidelight to the action, the American players had decided, both under the recommendation of Ben Hogan and through their own past experience, to use the British ball rather than the slightly larger American golf ball. The size difference is really minimal. The U.S. ball on the right is 1.680 inches in diameter, the British ball 1.620 inches. But almost all golfers agree that the smaller ball reacts better in the wind, and on a normal day will go further than the bigger one. If there's a disadvantage to the smaller ball, it's that it tends to lie lower in the grass. And if the grass is long, there can be some difficult lies. But the champions' fairways were cropped like a rookie soldier's haircut. A BB would sit up well on this great turf, so the Americans went all out for the smaller ball. On the second day, Saturday, There was again a bright and warm Texas sun. And now a weekend crowd blossomed forth to swell the gallery significantly over the previous day. And that despite the stiff competition of popular football games in the Houston area. Coach Di Rees kept tabs on the action of Tony Jacklin, who was warming up on the practice tee before the start of play. And of course, there was the ever-present white cap, under which was Ben Hogan, his sharp eyes assessing his players all the time. The players were now paired off for the 4-ball or best ball matches. Now each golfer in a twosome played his own ball all the way. If one man birdied a hole and his partner made a par, the birdie constituted the team score on the hole. In the first morning match, Peter Alice and Christy O'Connor took on Billy Casper and Gay Brewer. And at the third hole, an advantage was taken. Gay got a good putt rolling at the hole and in for a birdie 3. It was up to Christy O'Connor to keep the match even. But as noted earlier, the British players were having trouble on the greens. And while the effort was there, the touch wasn't. The Britishers won but 1 hole out of 16 played and lost the morning round 3-2. In the morning match between Gardner Dickinson and Doug Sanders of the United States and Brian Huggett and George Will of Great Britain, it was even coming up to the 9th hole. On this 510-yard par 5, Gardner had a third shot from near the green, but out of rough grass. He made a fine long pitch and run shot, though, and eventually got his birdie 4. George Will had a short one to keep the match even. But he failed, and his reaction mirrored the British efforts in general on the greens. 2 up going to the 15. Gardner struck a fine iron approach to the green. The ball held well, and he had another good chance at a birdie. Brian Huggett, from about the same distance, drew his shot wide of the pin. To add insult to pending injury, Doug Sanders cracked an even better approach shot than his partner Dickinson, finishing inside Gardner's ball. George Will then exemplified the growing British futility in playing to the big champion's greens, pushing his second shot even wider of the pin than Huggett. Sanders and Dickinson won the hole with a birdie to go 3 up and closed out the match on the next hole, winning 3-2. Dave Thomas and Tony Jacklin were teamed up in their morning best ball match, and they played hard and well together. Their opponents were the soft-spoken Californians, Gene Littler, here exhibiting a fine touch from the fringe of the second green, and Al Geiberger, who on the same hole made a terrific try at a birdie 3. The ball acting as though on a string and staying out. But he and Gene got a few putts later on, and the Americans, in a tough struggle, won 1 up. When Bobby Nichols and Johnny Pott brought in a 1-up victory over Bernard Hunt and Neil Coles, the American team had made a clean sweep of the morning round. They led now 9.5 to 2.5. In the afternoon round, Arnold Palmer and Julius Boros were sent back into action after being given the morning off by Captain Hogan. They were matched against George Will and Hugh Boyle. At the second hole, Arnie had a short putt to keep the match even. But he failed, much to his dismay. The British twosome, from this point, made a strong rush on the front 9. With Will's putter well warmed up, he and Boyle were 3 up going into the par 5 9th, which Will hit in 2. He had about a 35-footer for an eagle. And he rammed it home. The elated Briton received a well-deserved ovation. He and Boyle had put together a best ball of 30, 5 under par for the 9, and were 4 up on Palmer and Boros at the turn. But Arnie and Julius made it clear that they were still in the game and had no intention of playing dead. The Americans won the 10th hole with a par, and on 11, Palmer had a short birdie chance. He made it good, and he and Boros were now only 2 down with 7 more holes to play. They were definitely making it a game. And the Britishers, now being put under extreme pressure, had a few cracks open in their armor. With guys like Palmer and Boros breathing down your neck, things can get a little tough. Arnie and Julius won the 13th with a birdie 4 and the 14th with a birdie 3. Clearly on the move, they won the match on the final green with a par 4. It was a match that set the tone for all the others that Saturday afternoon, and the team of Malcolm Gregson and Peter Alice lost to Doug Sanders and Gardner Dickinson 3-2. Here's Englishman Bernard Hunt's approach to the 6th green. He and Neil Coles were paired against Billy Casper and Gay Brewer, and as this shot indicates, they were not quite strong enough. Gay Brewer, with just about the same shot into the 6th green as Hunt's, drilled the ball at the flagstick and close in for a birdie. A man can't hope to make too many putts from 50 and 60 feet, and Hunt here had to be satisfied with a par 4. Brewer, with a good chance for a win on the hole, made good, and the U.S. team eventually won 5-3. Al Geiberger and Gene Littler renewed their struggle in the afternoon round with Tony Jacklin and Dave Thomas. It was another red-hot duel, but the Britons simply could not get the important putts. They played to a draw for the only 1/2 point the British could get out of the whole of Saturday's play, and all the feminine sympathy in the world wouldn't help. The United States now had an almost insurmountable lead after 2 days of play of 13-3, with only 16 more points outstanding in Sunday's singles matches. On Sunday morning, at least, the weather broke English. A heavy fog had rolled in over the champions' course, and only the sound of Big Ben's gong was missing from this traditional British atmosphere. Play was delayed until there was at least minimum visibility. Once underway, the British made a good run at the American pros. The omnipresent diaries had some words of advice and encouragement for Peter Allis, who was in a tight contest with Billy Casper. It went to the 17th hole, but Billy of the golden putting touch prevailed, lagging a long putt dead stony. Allis conceded and Billy was congratulated all around for his 2-1 win. On this fog-shrouded morning, Tony Jacklin and Arnold Palmer were paired off in what promised to be an exciting match. They began play at the 10th, a par 4, and young Tony made a fine pitch in close and had a chance to scramble a par. Arnie had a putt for a birdie from the fringe, practically the full width of the green. He rapped it boldly over the dew and fog-dampened surface and took a lead he would never relinquish. Palmer eventually won 3-2. With the Americans and British both playing the smaller ball, Neil Coles took time to mark his ball to distinguish it from his opponent's Doug Sanders. Coles then beat Doug 2-1. Brian Huggett also kept the slim British hopes alive, defeating Julius Boris 1-up. Bernard Hunt and Bobby Nichols played to a draw, as did Dave Thomas and Gene Littler. But Gay Brewer romped over Hugh Boyle, winning 4-3. And while Malcolm Gregson made a valiant effort against Al Geiberger, the Englishman lost the match 4-2. Thus, to all intents and purposes, the Ryder Cup matches had come to an end. After Sunday morning's singles rounds, the United States had 18 points to Great Britain's 8. And even were they to lose every match in the afternoon, the United States pros could not lose the series. The weather cleared in the afternoon for the concluding 18-hole singles matches, and the players from both teams, consummate professionals to the end, put on an excellent display of golf that kept the large galleries thoroughly entertained. The British put up 2.5 more points for their side in these last matches. The Americans got 5.5. The final score for the 1967 Ryder Cup matches was the United States 23.5, Great Britain 8.5. And Ben Hogan, representing the United States, accepted the Ryder Cup, which remained in American possession for the 5th consecutive time. With the Rice University Band playing at the closing ceremonies, the British and American flags were rung down, but only until that time when they would again hang together in future Ryder Cup competition. For despite the score, it was a fine event that served a larger purpose than mere winning or losing. It brought together golfers, people from different parts of the world, to share a valuable and enriching experience.